This is the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, session number 192. James Brown, the Professional Opportunist.
Welcome to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast with Jason Linett, your professional resource for hypnosis training and outstanding business success. Here's your host, Jason Linett.
So imagine you're sitting at a hypnosis convention and there's somebody up on stage giving a presentation, and the emergence pattern, rather than the standard in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 3, this is what's going to happen, or at your own time when your eyes open, notice how good you feel. The standard dialogue that we would all often use. Instead, by way of proving a point, his emergence pattern is instead, go ahead and go through whatever mental voodoo you feel is necessary to bring yourself out of whatever you're calling this thing. And then the client's eyes open up. Well, that was my first live introduction to James Brown, who joins me on the program here today, which the backstory to this is it was a very fascinating, if not slightly polarizing dialogue that he introduced in his presentation when I was back in London at the UK Hypnosis Conference in 2018. A presentation which I'm going to have him give you a little bit of a play-by-play of some of the themes in this dialogue we're about to have, in terms of how doing very powerful instant inductions and reinductions, basically without any technique behind it, just kind of looking at what are some of the elements that are actually making the hypnotic experience work. How is it we can look at the process as an art? How is it we can begin to break away some of the, as he would call it, structured rituals of the process, and really, almost like a magic trick, chunk it all down to the individual ingredients and realize that the secret behind a lot of what we do is actually quite simple. A favorite moment is having that almost crisis of conscience as somebody who has lived by the phrase of learning the rules to break them. And well, James did a good job of breaking that mindset of mine. And that ability that over time we can begin to have different opinions, different approaches, and really different thinking behind the work that we do, and the whole philosophy of the wrongness approach, which we wrap up this dialogue on in terms of, as James would call himself, the professional opportunist, to look at the opportunities that are there and how do we harness it and break this all or nothing mindset that, you know, if you're working with a client for weight loss, as soon as you break the all or nothing mindset, if you're working with a client with anxiety or fear, as soon as you help them break out of that all or nothing mindset, but it's an amazing gift to even bring that same dialogue to us as the hypnotist, that it's not a matter of does the technique work or not, it's instead, how do I pivot it from here? How do I put it into use? So check out James's website. We'll give the links over in the show notes over at worksmarthypnosis.com, but it's simply POWA.Academy. That's where you can check out his work, his recent book as well. And while you're on the web, head over to worksmarthypnosis.com/training. That's the simplest link I can give you to all the upcoming events that I'm hosting, whether it's my live hypnosis training, my NLP trainings, as well as the online programs, plus the recently announced pre- and post offerings for HypnoThoughts Live 2019. There's a lot of great options there to look at programs both live and online, plus some guest training events as we're bringing Bob Burns to the States in March 2019. Again, all these training opportunities, check them out over at worksmarthypnosis.com/training. And with that, let's jump directly into this outstanding conversation. This is session number 192, James Brown, the Professional Opportunist.
Oh, right. Okay, so my origins in hypnosis are slightly diverse in a sense. I've been doing magic for a good number of years and pickpocketing. I had an original background, sort of my previous life, as it were, within the medical profession, within psychiatric nursing. But by the time I'd been doing magic for maybe 8 years, 5 to 8 years, I stumbled across some chap who wanted to learn. In fact, Paul Dawkins is the guy's name, known to some hypnotists here in the UK, I dare say. and he wanted to learn pickpocketing, theatrical pickpocketing. And I sort of had a vague interest in hypnosis, but very much at a distance. And I said, well, I tell you what, why don't we spend a day together? I can spend half the day explaining pickpocketing to you. You can spend half the day explaining hypnosis to me. And I thought this was a fair exchange. He went first, actually. And bearing in mind, this is, oh, goodness knows how many years ago now, but bearing in mind it was the very traditional sort of classic stage hypnosis framing, pre-talk, induction, deepener, suggestion, wake up, the classic setup. And he sort of gave me the information, but I was interested in sort of the periphery of it. What was really going on, what was making it work. What was interesting is when it came to my turn, I essentially said at the beginning of my half of the afternoon, well, I'm about to kind of say pretty much the same thing back to you. And all the way through the morning, I'd been seeing these strong parallels between the hypnosis and the pickpocketing, which might not make sense to somebody on the surface of it.
Yeah, that's something we got to explore here.
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting, and this is something that I've talked about on a number of occasions. One of the effects of so let me jump back in here a second. Then there was maybe about a 5-year gap, and I dabbled here and there, and I was doing the sort of inducing hypnosis, and I was pretty good at it. And then I met Adam Eason 15 years ago now, probably, at some business breakfast meeting. I was there as a magician. He was obviously there as a hypnotherapist, and then things started to grow because suddenly I had access to somebody who had a better depth of knowledge, and then we started doing some work together. He obviously recognised a sort of a flair, if you like, for the art, because, by the way, I see hypnosis as an art primarily. It's something that you can be very creative in doing. That is far more than a set of structured rituals. In fact, I'm very much against the structured rituals approach, but there we go. So yeah, that was it. The big thing for me in all of this along the way was I brought my thinking as a magician. Now, what people don't necessarily realize, or certainly don't think about, is that the way that magic works is if you meet a magician, and particularly when you see a magician on television or on stage, when the magician tells you how the magic was done and sort of, seemingly pulls back the curtain and shows you the secret, they are almost certainly lying to you. Mm-hmm. Almost certainly. Not always, but almost certainly. The explanation as to how the magic works is usually in and of itself another layer of misdirection and another layer of theatre. And as a result of this knowledge and the passion I have for magic and for deception and for perception, I've become very acutely aware of things that sound like and look like the sort of the magical obfuscation that we use. And when I first started to look into hypnosis, all of the explanations for what hypnosis was and how it worked, the trance depth, all of these things, it all sounded to me like the BS I would tell somebody when explaining how a magic trick was done.
Yeah.
And no matter how much it worked and no matter how successful I was in pursuing the subject, there was always this niggling doubt, this voice in the back of my head that just was screaming at me, this is a magic trick. There's something wrong with this. And back to the idea of magic. The real answer to magic is usually painfully simple. It's dressed up theatrically to make it more exciting than actually the truth is. Yeah, if I'm reading your mind, the sad truth is that either I'm guessing, or I already know, or I found out somehow. And those are really dull answers. So we have to create.
Right, and just to give some context here, I mean, this might even bring us, because I had a background in magic before, in mentalism, before getting into hypnosis,
Yes, of
and then the
course.
hypnosis is what took over. Though I'd mention, and it's the quote of someone who may be a cross connection here, previous guest here on the podcast, Alon New, that I think it was his quote of "Don't NLP on my leg and tell me it's raining." Which goes back to I am reading your body language and I am reading your eye contact, and that's how I told you the name of your friend. When meanwhile, no, I peeked at the piece of paper when you weren't looking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that it comes back to a very simple thing, and I love this connection of this dialogue to structured rituals. That there may be some value to learning the rituals of the hypnosis process in order to learning the rules to break the rules. At times that, we do our induction, now we do our deepeners, now we're into the suggestions, yet the deeper someone gets into this field, the more they realize the entire process is about that hypnotic suggestion.
Yeah. You see, I've got to be honest, I've never quite bought this argument of, somebody has to learn the rules to break them.
Mm-hmm.
It to me, that sounds like a sort of a self-justifying argument. It sounds like the kind of thing that you create after the fact to justify why you wasted all that bloody time learning the rules in the first place.
Oh, I love it.
I'm not convinced that that's actually true. I think that you can. In fact, I don't just think, I know, because Danny, my business partner, and I have actually done this with at least 10 people that we've personally mentored to understand hypnosis from scratch. We didn't introduce them to the rituals. We didn't introduce them to this structure. We started off with, right, this is what we think is going on in the very basic sense. And then we just built up a picture around that. And sort of, as it were, once they understood it, we sent them out into the world, and certainly 5 of them have made a very successful career out of hypnosis. So we kind of use the term reality bending because we just feel it's a better descriptor than the word hypnosis. It's got less baggage for a start, but the idea that they'd have to have learned the bad habits to then be able to unlearn them later just doesn't make it. I mean, it doesn't even make sense, does it? Why teach somebody bad habits just so in the future you can free them up to not use those, to not have those habits anymore? Just don't teach them the damn bad habits to begin with, or at least teach them better habits. Teach them to understand what's going on.
And my immediate thought to that would be that sometimes there is the scenario, then again, this goes back to the original concept, where, and I can think of a client just yesterday that had a preconceived notion as to how the process was about to go. That I'd quote someone like Richard Nongard, who talks about when you're doing a 5-to-1 deepener, there's this sort of innate ability that they've seen the Dracula movies, and part of the mind is going, oh, that's right, that's what hypnotists do. So there is that aspect of delivering some of the expectation of the experience, the way that there are some who would be of a conversational hypnosis process that unless there's the conscious hook to hang the process off of, they may be wondering, was I actually experiencing hypnosis? When we can know from our side of it, we've got the change in motion, we've got something in action here. Yet to actually satisfy that conscious aspect of, yes, that was the hypnosis part of what we did. Perhaps.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, this is why I like. But so to me, actually, the irony is this fits into this notion of freedom.
Yes.
In the lecture I gave at the UKHC, I talk about this idea of looking at all of these approaches as a buffet. And the question is, have you limited yourself to only one section of the buffet, or are you actually free to dine out? Wherever you like.
And just to rewind back here, that dialogue that you gave around the buffet metaphor is the moment I went, I got to have this guy on the podcast. For those that weren't there, can you reiterate what that was?
Yeah, well, so stepping back really a little bit further, I have I made a point at the UK Hypnosis convention that there's a fear that I have around the hypnosis community, which has become very, very religious. It's become very doctrinal. That there's groups of people following a leader, and there's bands of sort of apostles and almost prophets of these particular people. And while I've got nothing against learning from certain sources and even following the people that you admire, the danger is when it becomes religious to the extent that everybody else is wrong, that using the religious parlance, we have the truth and everybody else, they're all sinners and demons and whatever else. And that kind of us and them polarized thinking, which sadly is fairly pervasive in the world today anyway, is definitely within the hypnosis community. We're right, they're wrong. And I actually think that's very limiting, and it's very dangerous for lots and lots of reasons. And I likened the idea to, look, this is a big buffet. There are things that taste good to me. There are things that don't taste good to me. Why not have all of the buffet available, and I can just go and pick and choose to what suits me, what suits my palate, what works best for me, and also bearing in mind that actually my tastes will and do change. That just because I didn't like this today doesn't mean in a few years' time I shouldn't come back and try it again, because actually it might taste better. I might know something that I didn't know now that I do know then, and so on. And it's just about this ability to pick up and let go. And the link I made to religion was actually the idea of identity. And this was the discussion that I'd had in the past with Jorgen and Martin Taylor and a few others, was this idea of, does what you do as a hypnotist or a hypnotherapist, does that define who you are? Is that all you are? Because if it is, if you've tied your very sense of self up with not just what you do, but specifically what you do, then to change your mind on something or let go of something means sacrificing a sense of self, which is why I think that people are scared to do that. People have invested huge amounts of time and money and their own identity in following this particular doctrinal path. So if anything comes to knock it slightly or even destroy it, because there are, whether we like it or not, certain things that we've believed as hypnotists for decades, science is now saying no, and here's the evidence for it.
Yeah.
Now, should we, for me, I don't have a problem letting go of this stuff at all. I mean, there are things that I believe, there are things that I absolutely firmly believed 10 years ago, without a doubt, about hypnosis. And then, that pesky thing called evidence came along. So I went, okay, that's fine. That didn't mean that that didn't mean that I had to stop making use of it. I just had to stop believing it was happening for that reason.
But also, I mean, to look at it from the perspective that to come out of it, to realize that, back to the magic example, I may have thought, let's use a simple example, that for whatever strategy that you've used to somehow figure out a hidden piece of information, whether it's a word that someone's looked at in a book or a name that someone's thought of, the strategy to go, okay, if I'm thinking of your first name, James, I just want you to scramble up those letters in your mind and focus on one of those letters. You're focusing on the letter M, aren't you? Which is just a bit of a guess, just by intuition. Yeah. There's not much to it other than that strategy. And it's where to ask, a dozen people in a room, how was it I was able to pick that up? And someone's going to have some sort of more esoteric description of that. Someone else is going to have a very simple logical explanation. And to some degree, everybody is kind of right. So I love that nuance you just mentioned there of not necessarily dismissing everything that was there before, but almost using it to a different degree, because now kind of going deeper into it, seeing that, well, maybe something else was going on inside of this. And because I can highlight that, I can do it a little bit better now.
Yeah, and being being willing not to be to be absolute in the moment, but allow that moment to change as well. So I think it's important that we as human beings, it's important that we own our belief, that we actually have a real sense of, okay, this is what I think, and I'm going to, to fight my corner, to stand up for what I think is right. I think that's an admirable and courageous tool, an attitude for a human being.
This may be a much deeper question, though, which would be that I find extreme passion and delight in the moment of finding out I was wrong. So it's where in recent years, here's a moment where here's a school of thought that I just no longer agree with. Here's a product that I sold thousands of dollars of, and I took the thing off the market to then redo it because the way that I originally taught it, I was wrong. Here's a whole school of thought, a whole organization that I used to align with, and saw that everyone else moved forward and they were moving backwards, and recognizing that any decision I make, the delight of not just to the entire profession, but the people who have spent time with me in a classroom, I get to answer to those people as well. And it's not that statement of, no, I was wrong. It's instead here's this evolution of the process, and seeing that this one way of getting into it, may not be the only way to do it.
But that's also, using the magic reference again, there's been lots of things where I've learned how to do a move, a sleight of hand, particularly with card magic, which is sort of the area that I spend a lot of my time in. So I'll spend, months, and I mean months of hour after hour after hour of practicing something to get really good muscle memory of a very difficult sleight of hand technique. And then after maybe working it for a few years and really owning it, one of my friends will come up to me and go, "Oh, there's a much easier way and more efficient way to do this." And they'll show me that new way. And I don't look at it of, I'm not sort of thinking, well, I've got to ignore this now because I've invested so much in what I already knew. My response is, yay, brilliant. That's fantastic. I'm so pleased.
And let's bring that into the hypnosis dialogue here, that suddenly now it's not that the old method is no longer good. It's that you have a different method now. And for whatever reason in the magic world, maybe in this environment of performance, the angles are not right for you to use that new method, or for whatever reason. The same as you may find working with a client, this school of thought that I'm now sort of ascribing to and looking at, when suddenly here comes the client who they sit down and they deliver that amazing hypnotic contract that just simply says, "Oh, if I could fill in the blank, this would be a whole lot easier." And they've just described that old technique you used to use. Now's the time to pull it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I think that there's almost, I've always said there's a couple of layers to this. A comment I made to Adam Eason about maybe up to sort of 5-6 years ago now was, I believe we should be scientific, evidence-based in our research and development. And by that I mean to actually have the scientific mind, which is to be as objective as we as subjective human beings can be. So we try and disprove our theories rather than go out to prove them correct. We use the scientific method of disproving. We are eager to be wrong. We are excited by anything that expands our knowledge further, and that should be our mindset. However, in our use of hypnosis, we should be as creative as possible. And I think those are two kind of slightly separate entities. That when I'm performing hypnosis for theatrical purposes, I tend to use it for, but I do still do a little bit of therapy as well. That to me is the time where I can sort of I can bring into being everything that I've learned and everything that I know, but I can listen and be intent with the person that I'm working with, be observant of what they do and how they do it, and just help them paint this wonderful mental picture. Bring everything to bear in this moment. And if that means dipping into a technique that personally I think is nothing more than a placebo, then I will, because it's going to work. It's going to be useful. I'm going to pay attention to the person's culture, their background, their religious beliefs. I worked with somebody not that long ago who was a very, very devout Catholic, and they had a really strong belief in demons as being the cause of ills in the world, and it was their distance from God that meant that they were feeling the things that they were feeling. So essentially, I just use those as great metaphors to help them rethink and learn from a situation, and reorder their thoughts and their ideas in a very hypnotic fashion. So just because, and I'm not sitting there going, no, this is just a placebo, grow up, because that's not going to have the positive effect. But it's again, sort of, because I find it easy to think along the magic lines. The danger to me is do we end up believing the lies ourselves? And this is the little sort of crossover that I fear with some hypnosis. I think that hypnotists, because maybe they've just grown up with hypnosis in a clinical setting, within hypnotherapy, and they went to a school and they learned hypnotherapy. And I know that people might not like me saying this, but I think it's dangerous to forget that hypnosis, the history of hypnosis, has an awful lot more in common with the deceptive arts than we like to admit. In the way that it's presented, the way that we use it, the whole mechanism of look in my eyes and sleep deeper and deeper, and everything that's come from that, which is a huge amount of therapy. The people listening to this as therapists may think, oh, I've never said sleep and I've never said look in my eyes. But actually, take what you do and look at it objectively and think, actually, the whole theatrical frame of this is still within this mystical world that I am able to delve into your subconscious mind, and I'm able to implant suggestions and make changes. It's very psychic, mediumship. It's all within that field, and I think we have to be cautious. It's so easy to step across a line where you actually start believing the stuff that you're saying in the wrong way, and I'm rambling slightly.
Well, I think the thing to highlight there is that while there may be some that completely would hear that statement and go, "That's not right. That's not what I'm doing," it's to pull back for a moment, and as I would phrase it sometimes, to look at society has now presented this role as the hypnotist. We have this profession that people will call up a hypnotist. I can think of practically any client I've seen over the last, let's call it out, 10 years or so that has come in, and part of their initial decision-making strategy was that they have a perception as to what we do. They have this idea in their mind that this is that role that we serve, and they see us as someone who can deliver that, who can help assist in that. And yes, there's going to be some, sliding scale to this. Here's the one who calls me up and says, "Hey, I saw the movie Get Out. I want you to do that to me so I can quit smoking. Don't do the brain thing, but, just do the stop smoking bit." And he's calling, and from a bit of a playful place, there's some truth behind that request, that he's seeing that this is an ability that we have. We have this, evolutionary psychology mindset that society and just evolution has given us this ability to go into this place in our minds. So to then be there with a client and not harness it in some way appropriately would always be my phrasing here. I'm not putting on dark eyeliner, makeup, and having low rolling fog and presenting the theatrical environment of something absolutely mystical, but I'm delivering, I'm flashing to a moment of a magic convention years ago where Max Maven is in the audience looking at someone on stage with the same damn makeup and going, huh. There's a reference. There's a reference 5% of the audience will get here. But to look at, again, this place that we are, there's an experience that we are also assisting to deliver that at its core, I love the dialogue back to the evidence that, let's actually put in techniques that actually work as opposed to just dressing that presents the expectation that it should work.
Yeah, yeah, and using using the theatricality as a device, as a tool to enhance somebody's experience isn't a bad thing. Writers, filmmakers, screenplays, actors. This world, history is full of an understanding that human beings love stories. And the way that we tell stories, the way that we create the light and shade around the story is incredibly important. But as long as you understand that this thing that you're doing is about creating this picture, rather than, and my issue with a lot of hypnotic stuff always comes back to this notion of what I've always referred to as the belief in spells and rituals. That there's a difference between saying, well, there are certain words and phrases and actions and gestures that are really good at creating emotions and feelings and expectation in people, and saying that there is something intrinsically magical about. So it's this idea of when somebody teaches an induction. And they teach a very specific, that you take the hand like this and you move it to this position and the elbow is turned just here and you say these precise words at this precise tone. And I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. Well, the suggestion here is, the implicit suggestion here is that unless you follow these perfectly, it doesn't work. Ergo, there is something specifically magical about the induction, about the ritual of the moves and the words. Now, the moment that you suggest that if I say these special words in this special way, it has this magical outcome. Well, you're talking about a spell, and this is where I start to, the hairs on the back of my neck go up a little bit, and I think, well, hang on a minute, no, we're now confusing effect with cause. And I think an awful lot of the things in hypnosis are, that we label as, oh, this is what makes it work. I think we're looking at the effect, not at the cause. And the cause is something much simpler, much more everyday, much more easy to understand, and actually helpful. And I think that's the point. I think that the more we strip away the ritual from hypnosis, the more beneficial it becomes. And one of the reasons for that is that, if you walked into a room of 10,000 people, a big stadium of 10,000 people, and if you said, right, we're just going to separate you out straight away. So line down the middle. Who thinks hypnosis is inherently good? Who thinks it's inherently bad? You would, I don't know what the percentage would be, but you would split the room. There'd be no doubt about it. There would be a mass of people that would think it was wrong and a mass of people who think it right, and maybe a group of people who kind of didn't know one way or the other. Now, if you subdivide those down again and you start asking more questions, you divide the room even further. Who thinks that hypnosis is fundamentally about controlling, that they see it as the, what I refer to as the Dark Lord character, the Max Maven esque look. And again, you would split the room down again. Now, here's where the problem lies. If you're presenting, and obviously it appeals to some, just like the guy who contacted you and said, I've seen the film Get Out, could you do that to me? Well, clearly he has belief in that, but not enough to scare him. Yet that film itself will have caused an awful lot more people to have decided never to contact a hypnotist, because it simply either created or reinforced the belief that hypnosis is somehow a dangerous thing, that it is, in the wrong hands, it could be used badly. Now, this is one of the reasons why about 5 years ago I stopped using the idea of hypnosis in my performance, as in the word hypnosis, and I also stripped away as many of the identifying markers as I possibly could. I stripped away the tonality, that sort of, do you know what I mean? That sort of, I think Adam calls it the Hush FM hypnotist voice.
Yeah.
I stripped away that. I stripped away the eyes closed. I stripped away the idea of relaxation, that everything was about, calming everything down. I stripped away most of the hypnotic language, the identifying hypnotic language markers, and particularly I stripped away the idea of me controlling you in anything other than a very playful, impish way. None of these things removed, by the way, made a toss of difference to the outcome. I still do exactly the same stuff that I used to do when I did formal induction, sleep deeper and deeper, deepeners, the whole lot. Yeah, I can still get to hallucination as fast as I could before. There's no change has been made on the efficacy level.
Just to pause you there for a second, I'm curious to ask, if you had to kind of give just a base level sort of description of a user experience, what would that look like in terms of describing that you're able to hit the same results, but without all the ritual?
Are you talking about, stepping you through what I do, or are you talking about?
Yeah, just a basic description of what you would do to satisfy that same result. The truth of the matter is I go almost immediately into some level of a demonstration with the individual. I do, what might be referred to as a set piece, a hand stick or an eye lock or something like that. But I go in like pretty much instantaneously. There's very little setup, save one explanation, and it's the explanation of. I'm going to ask you to imagine something, but when I say imagine it, I don't just mean think it, I mean feel and experience it too. The way our imagination works is not just the thought in our head, but it's actually creating the illusion of something with our own body. Let me give you an example. If I held my arm out and I imagine it's being, held up by maybe a piece of string connected to the ceiling, I could simply think about it, or I could allow my arm to take on the physiology as if it were hung up. In other words, I'd have the point of contact to the ceiling. I'd take all the way out of my arm. I would allow my arm to feel, as if it was held up, so that if I was looking away, genuinely, not only can I imagine the piece of string, but I can actually feel my arm behaving as if it's connected. And I just set up this idea that implicitly what I'm saying is I'm doing everything I possibly can to create the illusion for myself that it is. So I'm over explaining the as if principle, basically. Yet I have to ask, is that a suggestion just like the original framework?
No, I don't think it is. There's no suggestion in that. I'm simply telling you what you need to do.
Yeah.
I'm informing you what's going on before we do anything. Because part of the problem a lot of the times, in my experience, and what I think accounts largely for this kind of, 1 in 5, 2 in 5 numbers that hypnotists tend to throw out of 1 in 5 people, people you meet are somnambulist, and 1 in 5 people can't be hypnotized. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, but it's bullshit.
Oh, go for it.
It's absolute bullshit. It's one of these excuses that is made after the fact to justify what's happened, rather than because it's actually got meaning to it.
Well, I mean, it's the same dialogue of, the resistant client. It's it's a result of a lack of rapport and a lack of flexibility on the practitioner.
Absolutely. And my experience says that for the majority of situations, there are a handful of reasons why somebody doesn't have an experience. I believe that everybody can be hypnotized, just not everybody will choose to be hypnotized under the circumstances at the time. I think those are two very different ideas, and the latter makes more sense. And one of the reasons why somebody doesn't get hypnotized is, in fact, the most common reason in my estimation is that they actually don't understand what their role is, what their part to play is. Because if you... So again, it's this idea of, if you believe that hypnosis, if you believe in hypnosis as a ritual and a spell, you believe that you are doing hypnosis to somebody, that you have a power over somebody else by means of some ritual or spell that you enchant them with. If you, on the other hand, believe that that's not what's happening and there is something more scientific, more natural going on, then it stands to reason that it's the person that's actually doing all of the heavy lifting. You are, I love the analogy of the actor-director. You are the director as the hypnotist, they are the actor. You are simply directing them to act. But it's up to them to be a good actor or not. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, we simply rely blindly on the frame of hypnosis to work. You know, I'm a hypnotist, I'm a hypnotherapist. Let's do these various games that kind of do something, but not necessarily anything special. You know, the eye fixation, the various sort of hand clasps, etc. But even the things like magnetic hands, even classic things like magnetic hands, won't do anything unless the person actually understands what it is you're asking them to do. If if they just hold their hands out in front of them and they don't get that they actually have to engage in this, that they actually have to think as if to allow their body to create that sensation, nothing will happen. And it's not because they can't be hypnotized, it's probably because they don't understand the instructions.
Well, I mean, it's where there's a game at times to, I mean, the power of vague language, to just suggest to somebody you can notice that feeling moving throughout you without actually labeling it. But there does get to be a place where it becomes way too vague for someone to have any clue as to what's going on.
Even this idea of the vague language still only, it either hits home by pure chance that all of the ingredients around them add up to understanding. And there's a lot more ingredients going on than simply your words and their ears. And that was something else I kind of I love to tap into this when I'm at conventions. Sorry to digress slightly, but I love tapping in at this at conventions, hypnosis conventions, and sort of workshop days that go on, and NLP trainings, because I walk in there and I appear to be a god amongst hypnotists half the time, because I'm walking in and I'm inducing hypnosis like I did at the UKHC by flicking water in somebody's face. And people are stunned. How is this possible? Teach us your ways, O master. But what they fail to understand is actually all I'm doing is I'm making use of where we are and who we're talking about and what's going on. To me, all of this is a massive bunch of suggestions and presuppositions and expectations and intentions.
Yeah, for those that weren't there, could you just kind of give us a sort of a play-by-play description of what that demo looked like that you did back in London?
Well, the great part of this is that almost everybody seemingly missed the actual first part. Was I very casually and offhandedly said something along the lines of, I said, look, I really don't have a lot of time here. So who here's a really great subject? And immediately one person in front of me put their hands up and I went, right, perfect, up you come. And as he got to the stage, I don't think I did anything other than I just sort of just pushed him back into a chair and said, sleep. There was nothing else going on.
You stared him in the eyes and you pushed him down in the chair and said, sleep.
I stared at him first, did I? Okay, I stared at him first just to make sure that the
because James, you and I know without the stares.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I can't ignore the magic stare. Yeah, I mean, just for context, and I'm sure everybody listening to this must know, but the stare only had one purpose. And that was just to essentially say to him, right, something's about to happen. That's all. And it's it's the same as when we do magic. There are little moments where you pause, and you pause that little theatrical pause. It's simply because you want that little moment of silence, so that your audience, your subject, your spectator, just leans forward in their chair with expectation. Something's about to happen. And that's all that was. And then, of course,
well, this was the dialogue that you and I were having before I hit record, that I was talking about just and what the technique is doesn't really matter for this dialogue, but here's a technique that I'll use with a client that I found by stepping in and doing that stare, making that eye contact, it got a night and day difference. Yes. It's that scene change. It's again back to the movie reference of the power of melodrama. Suddenly here's the music in the scary movie, which is winding you up, telling you something's about to happen. Here's back to my theater career, a moment where it's this fun, light, entertaining musical, and the director's lighting it like a tragedy, and he got the lighting designer's lighting it like a tragedy, and promptly got fired and replaced to go, hey guys, this is funny, and you had to light it in such a way that the audience could, the brightness of it was now standing out. So there's that framing around it.
That was it. Well, you'll know of Luc Jammet, who's an exceptional mind in the world of mentalism, of magic mentalism. And Luke talks extensively in one of his early books about the idea of the witch doctor effect. The very simple concept that you do something and you hold that moment for long enough, and it might be something as simple as just slowly rubbing your finger and thumb together, but you do it with such intense intent. While you're doing it, you actually don't necessarily know what the outcome of this moment of intense intent will be, but what you're doing is you're giving space to the spectator, to the audience, to find the answer, to fill in that gap, because they are desperate to know what this means, and they will fill in meaning for you if left long enough to do so. And again, I love utilizing that in the hypnotic environment. As long as there is a sense, there is a frame that creates just the opening for a bit of expectation from them, you can make anything work, including, as I then went on to do as another demonstration, was take a cup of water that I'd all but finished and just stand in silence, flicking the chap with droplets of water from the almost empty cup, knowing, of course, that on the third time, the magic third time, he would descend into this beautiful world of hypnosis. I mean, whatever the hell that would mean to him, and of course he did. So yeah, it did. Using their frame of reference is fun, of course, but moving away from. So quickly going back to what you said, I mean, essentially my whole setup is simply everything about what I'm going to be doing is I want you to play a game with me. So that my whole setup is really about, I want you to imagine something, and then we are going to create the illusion, which is just a perfectly normal everyday thing that your brain does anyway. We are going to create the illusion of it happening to you, which is obviously using the language of Anthony Jacquin, the head hacking team, turning a doing into a happening. That we're going to ask you to imagine something, and then we're going to create the right environment for that to feel involuntary at some level. And from here on in, we're just working up what I call the plausibility scale. We're taking things and we're making them more and more plausible because of your experience. And take something as simple as a hand sticking down. Now, the reality to a hand stick is that the way a hand stick works is because the person is pushing down with their hand. That's the way that the body creates the illusion of their hand being stuck, by pushing down. So the only thing I need to do to create the phenomena that it's stuck for real is for the person to stop realizing they're pushing down. The moment they are no longer aware of pushing down is the moment where they experience it as stuck. And literally, so from an internal dialogue point of view, it's that beautiful phrase that you can see it. You can see the moment in the person's eyes where internally they think, I can't lift my hand. And usually for most people, the prefix to that is, oh shit, I can't lift my hand. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Danny and I actually in our work talk about the oh shit moment. And it's a great moment, and it's a great moment to find, because as soon as you have it, then now whatever frame you want to place on it, you can place on it. You can play with that. And if you want to make this a beautiful cooperative actor-director environment, you can make it that, which is kind of what we like as a frame anyway. It's a non-threatening frame. But from a theatrical point of view, sometimes when I'm doing particularly sort of fun corporate shows, I will play with that frame, and I will slowly twist it so it starts as this wonderful, fun, light, fluffy thing that we do, but then I just slowly and carefully turn it darker and darker and darker until the end of it is very much like the evil puppet master, that I'm just controlling your body, that you have full conscious awareness of all of this. So it's as if you are awake whilst your body has been taken over entirely, and I am making you move around the stage, and it's purposefully designed to be a frightening experience. It's designed to feel terribly unnerving for the participant and the audience. But don't forget, I've not thrown you in the deep end at this. We've played to this point, and I allow this experience, and then the experience is released, and the subject and the audience learns a great deal about what's really happening, about themselves, about the sense of control, about empowerment. So there's a really positive message at the end of all of it. So there's no sting in the tail, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking for what I'd kind of asked the question, because so far we've been in the dialogue of, let's call it a stage performance, let's call it, more of almost a street hypnosis kind of aspect of it. How does this all now get over to the dialogue of personal change? We're moving from that place of they're now in that hypnotic experience, whether it's a suggestibility type experience or the instant reinductions. How does that now translate in your mind towards the fact that people are able to make these rapid changes with hypnosis? Because
simply because I look at all of this as so none of the things that I'm doing, none of the structured things that I'm doing are important to me at all. None of them are. None of them are doing anything beyond being in and of themselves just another suggestion to help paint the picture in the person's mind. So why does this help me from a therapeutic point of view? Well, because it gives me a real sense of freedom, that we can look at what the issue is, and we can play with it in a variety of ways. And I can make it real for the individual, as real as they want it to be, as real as I need it to be for them, as real as they need it to be for themselves. So we can look at various different techniques of repatterning sort of feelings that they have about something. We can use metaphors and it's kind of dip into any change work arena, including sort of EFT tapping, anything at all. It doesn't really matter to me what it is. It's now much more about how do I help this person create something so powerful and so unique. And all of this comes down to my core belief that we are a collection of imagined experiences anyway. I believe what I believe because it was suggested to me in one form or another, and because I constantly play these tapes, if you like. Every situation I'm in, my mind is digging straight back into its resource pack and saying, right, have I done this before? And can I automate as much of my response as possible to save the limited bandwidth that this poor human James Brown actually has? My mind is always out to help me. It knows I'm a little bit thick, and therefore it wants to make my life as easy as possible. But unfortunately, along the way, it's automating lots of shitty programs that aren't really helpful to me. So the benefit of all of this is that we can play with various ways of changing the story, of altering the way I feel about something, reprogramming, we like, the thoughts and the feelings, so that I can play a better script the next time round. We could
tell me if this is a fair paraphrase, that basically it's through the use of hypnotic suggestion to create an alternate experience. It's kind of breaking away the reality of how how solid that problem was, that, we're kind of going deeper down that hole in terms of here's a different way that we can experience this world around us, and that original issue wasn't as solid, it wasn't as real of a story as we previously held on to.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a firm belief. The reason Danny and I called it reality bending was that all the research that we've done, all the neuroscience study that we've done over the last 5 or 10 years, has pointed us to that, the reality that we experience is not the reality that is. It is a meta-reality. It's a filtered reality. Even down to something as simple as our eyesight is only taking in a fraction of what we think it's taking in, and our minds are creating a positive illusion, a positive hallucination to fill in the gaps. And when we come together as people and we have conversations and we act very tribal by nature of gravitating towards people who we think see the world the way that we do, we solidify this reality as a shared experience. And when you start adding all of that up, you realize that actually, in fact, I think the best way to put it is bless her, my grandma, decades ago, and she's long since dead now, my grandma used to say, there's what I think, there's what you think, and then there's the truth. And what she was really getting at was the idea that none of us have access to that third part. Yeah, none of us do. There's what I think, there's what you think, and then there's the truth. But that is not in the reach of either of us, and that's the problem. That it's perpetually out of our reach, and I think reality is perpetually out of our reach. We are incapable of actually objectively experiencing it in any meaningful sense. So what we do now have to do is we now have to balance as best as we can between what I think is real and what is actually useful. I made a comment in the talk, which is a quote from somebody else, which is the problem with the world today is that people would rather be right than be useful. And a few people misunderstood what I meant by that. And I wasn't talking about being accurate, because being accurate is something to be striven for. To strive for.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is the subjective sense of rightness. And that includes the idea of this is how I feel, and I'm right to feel that way. I'm offended, and my subjective feelings are intrinsically important. No, actually, they're not. The problem is that's the issue. You'd rather be right than be useful. Yeah, and we all have that issue within us, that we'd rather be right. We'd rather say, no, this is how I feel, and this is my reality, and this is my life, and that's the way it is. And actually, I think from a therapeutic point of view, a lot of what we do is helping people reassess their certainty, to actually start to allow the healthy aspect of doubt. The reason that you feel the way that you do is because you're so damn certain that this is how you feel and this is real. And actually, it's to tap into Jorgen's phrase, it's a psychological illusion. You've created a world, you've spun a web around it so tightly that you think that this is real. And now you're looking for, essentially you've come here because you're looking for a magic spell. But actually, you don't need a magic spell. You just need to be willing to just have a closer look at this thing. And maybe it's just not what you thought it was. But to do that, we might have to unpack some other things. We might have to dismantle a few other things along the way. What I like about the methodology that we play with is that we're not tied to a script, a format. We can dip in and out of everywhere, because fundamentally the one thing that I'm interested in playing with is your belief. And that's it. It's all it comes down to. I believe hypnosis it works because of belief. I think it's about belief. The experience is one of belief. That's where the magic happens. It's in your belief. if you don't believe it, if you're not interested, if you're not paying attention, if your mind's elsewhere, the effect is different. But if I've got your belief, if I can play with your belief, then I literally have the keys to the kingdom. To just throw in another random metaphor for you, if I have your belief, I have the keys to your kingdom. I can do anything with you. I can manipulate every aspect of your being, who you think you are, your past, your present, your future. That's why I think that hypnotists are better served thinking about the way that they play with belief than they are thinking about the rules, the rituals, the spells of their craft, of the people that taught them.
I love it. I love it. So then, to tie it all together, I love the phrasing around the professional opportunist. What behind that? What is that? What you define as the wrongness approach?
Okay, so the wrongness approach was essentially born out of a couple of good friends of mine, Ian Rowland and Darius Zayatabari, who'd kind of been looking at my work and sort of modeling me in some respects. And I think it was Darius came up with the idea that, he referred to me as, he says, you're an opportunist. You seem to just change direction whenever you need to, and you let go of things that you don't need, and you just have this way of seizing the moment, very sort of carpe diem in the way that you think in life performance, and sort of in life as well. And Ian Rowland coined the wrongness approach because we'd had this deep conversation, and essentially I'd said that the problem I saw with people is that we are all fed into this idea of success failure, this binary outcome to almost everything that we do, right from early age, certainly from school, all the way through our life, our love lives, our occupations. Everything is bound up in you will either succeed at the thing that you're about to do, or you will fail. Success brings all these positive feelings. Failure brings all these negative feelings. Now, there are a couple of problems with this. The first is that your chance of failure is always significantly bigger than your chance of success, because the success, by definition, is a much narrower set of things to aim for. Yeah, failure is much more likely. The other side is that because of this impending doom, this impending failure that could happen at any moment, and all the bad, stress, anxiety, and weak worry feelings that it brings, we actually drag that baggage along with us through the process. So you think about somebody who has a problem with public speaking, or just doesn't like the idea, or maybe purely socially conditioned to believe that it's something that they should be terrified about. Man, that's a different subject altogether. But imagine that person who's got something to do. The problem is the first day that their boss says, in 6 weeks' time, you need to do this presentation. Every time they sit down to think about it, every time they sit down to do research or to start to write ideas down, in their head, there is this battle going on with these two sensations, these two feelings, and there's a good chance that the negative one is going to be bashing away at them constantly. So everything about the presentation, the preparation, the setup, the whole thing has this weight of expectation, and I think it's just a crap model ultimately. I think a much better way of thinking about these things is the idea of looking at things as being opportunities to enjoy myself and create joy for others. And whatever happens will be the right outcome, by virtue of the actual goal was not the outcome, but it was the enjoyment of the journey. And it might seem oversimplified, and there's a lot more work on it in the book, but it's this very clear idea that actually, if you think differently, if you take success and failure off the table right at the start, it doesn't stop you from getting to the summit that you were aiming for. It simply means that you get a chance to enjoy the damn journey, and you get to learn from the experience. It changes your outlook on things.
I mean, that's what also makes it extremely sustainable, as opposed to now that I've hit the goal, now what?
Yeah.
Instead, to really enjoy the process of getting there, which then has a much more natural progression to it.
Well, to give you a very quick story on this, to give you an example of the difference, a couple of years ago, I did a parachute jump, a tandem jump. A friend of mine invited me to go along and do it, and we went through this process. Now, literally, the moment he said about this, I just thought, wow, what a great opportunity to enjoy myself. That was the only thing I was thinking. Wow, what a fantastic opportunity to have an immense amount of fun. And every time I thought about it leading up, which initially was quite a lot, but then of course, life gets in the way, and we creep towards the date, and I'm busy doing other things. But every time I thought about it, I was just thinking, oh wow, that's a fantastic opportunity to have fun, to enjoy myself, and think about the enjoyment I could have with other people as well, before, during, and after. Got to the day itself, and we went through the various training things, and we got up into the aeroplane. And as we're going up in the plane, I was reading a book. Actually, I'd got into a particular book that I'd been reading sort of over the few days beforehand, and I thought, well, I know that there's a lot of downtime on the day. There's a lot of sitting around doing bugger all while you're waiting for other things to happen. So I thought, I'll take a book with me to read. So on the flight up, I'm reading a book, and we got to the point where they said, right, we're nearly there, just final checks attached to the instructor, and you're getting ready to jump out. And we jumped out, and I enjoyed every second of it. I mean, literally every moment of the whole thing. I loved it. Now, what was interesting was the conversations I had with everybody else during the day and after. Everybody else who was on that jump that day had been excited, nervous, terrified, all wrapped up into one, that they saw this as being a potential for success, but also a potential for failure. They had that binary mentality. And as a result, there was excitement wrapped up with anxiety all the way up to the day. On the journey up, people are now starting to really get nervous, and there's a lot of people shaking and feeling sick, and one person even was sort of saying that they wanted to back out. Usual scenario by all accounts. And there's me reading a book. People thinking there's something clinically wrong with me. But the point is, every one of them who jumped out of the plane missed the first 30 seconds of their descent. Because they weren't there. They weren't there in that.
Yeah.
They were wrapped up in the fear and the exhilaration, but they were wrapped up in that. And each of them that got to the ground, there was one person who actually didn't like it from start to finish, but that's because I think she decided not to like it from start to finish. But the majority of people, once they got going, and particularly once the chute opened, and that was the moment for people where the chute opened and they felt safe again. Yeah, it's not a big time difference between the two happening, of course. But when the chute opened, they felt safe again, and then particularly when they landed. And every time they this happened, they all said, "Oh, do you know what? I wish we could do it again, because then we could enjoy it." We kind of feel that we missed out on so much of the journey down, because we were just desperate to get back on the ground. Yeah, we were desperate to get to that successful outcome where we hadn't failed. Whereas I wasn't thinking about landing at all. I was thinking about having fun. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed everything about it. The lead up to the day itself, the journey up in the plane. Even though I was reading a book, it was an enjoyable book. What can I say? And then the moment we stepped out of the plane, I was present for the whole thing, and I loved it. I missed not a second, and I still have the very strong memory of the event as well. And actually, this is a mentality that you can play around with lots of things, and I certainly use it within hypnosis. It's why the wrongness approach is the foundation of what I do. It's the confidence that in what I do, so that people often say, oh, what happens if the subject doesn't, hypnotists are scared to test their work often because they're scared that the person might lift their hand up off the table or open their eyes at the wrong moment. And that fear doesn't affect me because, I don't look at that as being as reflecting on me. It's not my fault. I'm not, the outcome didn't bother me. It was the journey. So I'm actually more likely to enjoy the challenging client, the challenging subject, the difficult spectator than I am the blindly obedient one. Because to me, there's no fun in the easy subject. I've never understood hypnotists at conventions. I mean, it's not so much in the hypnotherapy world, but in the magic side of hypnosis. You go anywhere, and as soon as the hypnotists find one good subject, they kind of queue up to have a go one after another. And well, why? We already know this person's a great subject. What does this do? What does this prove? Other than guarantee you the successful outcome that you crave. Yeah. But you won't go over to a new table because now you're worried about failure. And now I will, because actually I'm not even thinking about that outcome. It's the moment, it's the present moment, it's the enjoyment that we can have, the enjoyment I can create in other people. If I say lift your hand and find you can't, and you lift your hand and everybody around laughs, great. Well,
now I get to do something with this.
Right on the moment. Great that they're laughing, because actually my desire from the start of this was to create joy. So you all laughing, well, that's a sign of joy, isn't it? Now people go, oh, but aren't you worried that they're laughing at you? Well, I'm not worried about it, and no, they're not. They're laughing at the situation. The only reason that I would see it as laughing at me is how I respond. If I respond in an uncomfortable way, now it very quickly turns into laughing at me. But if I look at it that they're laughing at the moment, the situation, now I can be a part of that joy too. Now I'm not separated from it. I'm not at the butt end of it. Now I can join in with the enjoyment of that. And then I can play with reframing it, and I can have fun with it, and I can morph it into whatever I need it to be with their help, and make it a collaborative endeavor. And I find that there's a huge amount of enjoyment and freedom to be had just by shifting the way that we think about situations. And, my favorite quote, I've used this so many times, it's a G.K. Chesterton quote, C.K. Chesterton quote, which is, angels fly because they take themselves lightly. And I think that's a great mantra to have, that we can take ourselves lightly. We can have fun with this, and we can fly. Ultimately, we can do incredible things as hypnotherapists, as hypnotists, as performers. But as long as we learn to take ourselves lightly, we can be serious about what we do. We can be thoughtful. We can be ethical. But we must also take ourselves lightly along the way.
Beautiful. James, where can people find out more about you online and track down the book too?
Okay, so the best place to get hold of us is www.powa.academy, www.powa.academy. If anybody specifically wants to hit me up with some stuff about hypnosis or confidence stuff, or the book, if you want to get into direct touch, then just email me, james@powa.academy, and I would be delighted to start a conversation with anybody, and and spread the love, spread the joy.
Jason Linett here once again, and as always, thank you so much for interacting with this program, for sharing it on your social media streams, leaving your reviews online. And once again, head over to worksmarthypnosis.com/training. That's where you can find all the upcoming live events as well as online educational programs to expand your learning and challenge these models of hypnosis and help a whole lot more people. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast at worksmarthypnosis.com.
Hey there, it's Jason, and I want you to be one of the first to find out as we upload amazing new content. So do this right now. Click the subscribe button right here on this video. That's going to link you to our YouTube channel here, and you will be the first to find out as new resources and downloads are made available. Do it now.